Hello everyone and welcome back to our very last 5-minute study in the book of Acts. We are in chapter 28 today. So as always, the notes are up on the screen, and I will say that now that we've completed the notes for every chapter, I'm going to turn these into a book. A hardcover book and a paperback book. They'll be available on Amazon.com. And so if you want to use these for just personal study or use them for a Bible class, or maybe you're teaching somebody about the book of Acts and these would be handy to you, they'll be available. I don't have an exact date for when that's going to come out, but keep your eye open. I'll announce it on the YouTube channel and on the website when it does. So now let's talk about our final chapter, Acts chapter 28. When did the events of this chapter take place? Well, Paul spent the winter on the island of Malta. That would have been approximately 59 to then 60, the spring of 60 AD. He then traveled to Rome, where he spent 2 years in house arrest, so approximately 60 to 62 AD. In terms of our characters, we've got Paul. He is a prisoner at this point. He's been sent from the city of Caesarea all the way. He's on his way to the city of Rome to stand trial before Caesar. And then we have the Maltese people. These are the native people of the island of Malta who showed a lot of hospitality to Paul and his shipmates. The chief man on the island of Malta was a guy by the name of Publius, and he hosted Paul's company for a while. We'll talk about him and his father. And then the Jewish leaders from Rome. Upon Paul's arrival in Rome, he called many of the local Jewish leaders to him, and he taught them about Jesus and about the kingdom of God. And we've kind of already touched on this, but as we look at the map, we can see where the events of this chapter take place. So Paul starts off in Malta, which is a pretty small island, and he makes his way to Rome. But he's going to stop in a place called Syracuse, Rhegium, and Puteoli. And now for our outline. The first section, verses 1 through 10, Paul's shipmates are welcomed by the Maltese, or the locals, in Malta. The locals showed them great hospitality when they found them shipwrecked on the beach, and they started a fire and welcomed them, tried to warm them up. When Paul was gathering sticks for this fire, there was a viper in the sticks, and the viper bit onto his hand, and the local people knew that this was a venomous viper. And they assumed that Paul must have been a murderer, because look, he had escaped the sea, but clearly the gods wanted him dead because now this viper has come to bite him. This isn't just bad luck. They're thinking, this guy must be a terrible guy, and this is his fate. This is what he deserves, to die. But when Paul kept walking around and remained unaffected by the venom, well, then the locals changed their mind. Paul wasn't a murderer anymore. They thought that he must be a god himself. A guy by the name of Publius, who's described as a chief man of the island, or rather the chief man of the island, he hosted Paul and his friends for 3 days and entertained them. Publius's father was sick with, quote, fever and dysentery, and when Paul found out about this, Paul healed him. Now afterwards, all of the sick people of the island came to Paul, and they were healed by him as well. But they couldn't remain islanders forever, and so that takes us into our second section. Paul's ship departs for Rome in verses 11 through 16. In total, they were on Malta for about 3 months through the winter time. And when the seas became more friendly, they started sailing for Rome. And they stopped in, as I mentioned, Syracuse, Rhegium, and Puteoli, where they stayed with some believers for 7 days. And when they finally arrived in Rome, Paul wasn't thrown in the dungeon or the prison with all the other prisoners. He was actually allowed to stay by himself, and there was a guard who accompanied him. And then for our final section, verses 17 through 31, Paul stays in Rome, and he meets with the Jewish local leaders. After only 3 days in the city, Paul called these Jewish leaders to him, and he wanted to meet with them. And he told them that he was a prisoner because the Jews in Judea and Asia hated him. The local Jews there in Rome said that they hadn't heard anything about him, so they didn't have a negative impression of Paul. They actually were interested in hearing what he believed and what he taught. So they came back on an appointed day, and Paul talked to them about Jesus and about the kingdom of heaven from, quote, morning until evening. And there was a disagreement that arose among the Jews because some of them believed Paul's words and some of them didn't believe. And the group ended up leaving when Paul became frustrated with them for their unbelief, and he told them that because of the Jews' unbelief, God was sending the message of salvation to the Gentiles. And chapter 28 concludes by telling us that Paul remained in his own house for 2 years, receiving visitors and proclaiming the kingdom of God to everybody who came to him. And so that is Acts chapter 28, and that is the book of Acts. Let's talk about one final application here as we close. No matter what your circumstances, find ways to serve others and to serve the Lord. You know, if I had to spend 2 years in house arrest after being falsely accused, shipped across the sea, and shipwrecked, I probably would have the tendency to sit and pout and to bemoan the fact that I was in this situation and I didn't deserve it and my circumstances should be better. But we see Paul getting to work 3 days after he arrives in Rome. He knows that there's work to do and he gets right to it. You don't see him sitting around pouting because he's locked in a house. And so I think the application for us is that no matter where we are, no matter what our circumstances, we can serve others and we can serve the Lord and we can do our best to proclaim the kingdom of God. Just know that this is not our home. We've got something better waiting for us. God will make all things right in the end. Everything's going to be all right. And as we close this Acts in 5 Minutes study, I just wanted to encourage you to check out the long form study, the verse-by-verse study of this, which is currently being produced on this channel, and more of that will be coming down the pipeline now that these are out of the way. I also wanted to thank everyone who has supported this channel, whether through encouragement and words, or also financially, and also through prayers. There's patrons and supporters who make all of these resources free for everybody and keep this channel going. So I just wanted to thank those people as well. And of course, to thank God for giving me the opportunity and the tools and the resources to be able to produce this content. And I hope it's been a blessing, and please share it if it can be a blessing to somebody that you know.